It was decision day here in Scotland. As voters headed to the polls, there was one overriding question. Will Nicola Sturgeon get her majority? And with it, the independence referendum she wants.
I'll first and foremost be fighting the pandemic, and then of course I want to give people the choice of independence.
I don't think we should go back to that divisive argument of the past. I think we really have to focus on what unites us.
We have our election analysts Colin and Jane with us tonight to assess how Scottish opinion has shifted and what it could mean for our union. Also on News at 10. The Tories are bullish in the elections outside Scotland, but why is the Labour Party still struggling? Great news on the economy as the Bank of England predicts the strongest growth since the Industrial Revolution and more than 1 million jobs saved. The battle for Jersey is over, but are we any closer to resolving the issues that sparked it? And wish you were here, why Israel is certain to be on tomorrow's green list and what to expect if you go.
The vast majority of locals have been fully vaccinated, and the tourists who choose to come here and join them will have to have been as well.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby in Edinburgh.
Good evening from Edinburgh, capital city of a country whose history is littered with famous dates of famous disputes with the English before the two were joined by the Acts of Union passed in 1707. The bond has held for more than 300 years, but as voting finished here a few minutes ago, political historians were left wondering whether 2021 will indeed enter the annals as the year that bond was seriously weakened. Nicola Sturgeon will have to wait a while for results to be counted to know whether her party, the SNP, does have enough seats in the next Scottish Parliament to put another independence referendum on the political agenda. Even without the outright majority she's been hoping and working for, support for the idea from Green Party MSPs may well be enough for her demand to come true.
Sorry, you want to sit there?
Nicola Sturgeon already voted by post, but with an SNP majority in the balance, she was out to rally her troops, even if it meant facing her fears.
You hold it, or I'll kneel down because I'm a bit scared of dogs.
She's less scared about taking the fight to Boris Johnson after this election, though.
Okay, right, quick.
Even though the Prime Minister has said no, she still sees herself delivering a referendum on Scottish independence if, as expected, the SNP wins.
It is entirely legitimate for Boris Johnson to passionately oppose independence, just as I passionately support it. But he has no right to stand in the way of the people of Scotland making that choice.
She then faced this election's first street confrontation, challenged by a far-right campaigner in her own constituency.
You're a fascist, you are a racist, and the south side of Glasgow will reject you.
Under new leadership, the Scottish Conservatives have made it their mission not to win this election, but to stop an SNP majority.
I don't think we should go back to that divisive argument of the past. I think we really have to focus on what unites us, and we've been united largely as a country over the last year.
How are we all?
Scottish Labour's new leader is similarly not in it to win it in this election. His first job is to stop losing any more seats to the SNP and rebuild his party's credibility in opposition.
Feeling really good, energised, looking forward to the final day of the campaign, getting as many votes out as possible.
The number registered for this Scottish election is a record high, and voters had to brave all 4 seasons in one day. 16-year-olds could vote, and some came straight from school.
I've been waiting since the last election to vote when I realised I would be old enough for this one, so it feels nice.
Voted against the people that took us out of Europe.
The SNP have got this independence thing which they keep going on about.
The UK Constitution does not guarantee Scotland a referendum, even if the SNP wins a majority. But experts say that is Nicola Sturgeon's best chance.
If it has an overall majority, that will put pressure on London to agree to another independence referendum. If there's a majority that consists of SNP, Greens and perhaps others who all favour a referendum, but the SNP falls short of an overall majority on its own, then the pressure will be less on London.
Piling on that pressure is Nicola Sturgeon's strategy, and it's why a majority matters, when they're already preparing to take on Westminster.
And Peter joins us from the Scottish Parliament just across the city. So Peter, what are you hearing from the SNP tonight about how they think they've done?
There's a sense of quiet encouragement from the SNP sources I'm speaking to. They're saying anecdotally there's evidence of an increased turnout in this election, and they believe that could help them because they've given voters something to be motivated by with the prospect of a second independence referendum on the horizon. But we have to bear in mind how Scotland's electoral system works. I mean, the SNP vote share was up in the last election 2016 compared to 2011, but they actually had fewer seats. So the SNP could increase their vote share in all of the seats that they currently hold, and it will not make one difference in that parliament. They need to be increasing their vote share in key strategic target seats, and the future of this country, Tom, could be coming down to just half a dozen of those 9 target seats. And we will find out. This election has been described as being on a knife edge. Well, the votes have been cast, the polls are closed now, and it will be Saturday night, possibly even Sunday morning, before we hear what the people of Scotland have said.
OK, Peter, thank you very much indeed. Now, it wouldn't be an election here on ITV News without our regular and much-loved experts. So I'm joined by Professor Jane Green from Nuffield College, Oxford, and co-director of the British Election Study, and by Professor Colin Rallings, our ITV News election analyst from the rather more cosy confines of his home in North Yorkshire. Social distancing has kept us apart, hopefully for the last time. Colin's home looks slightly more comfortable than here, Jane, but we'll pass over that. Look, let's go back to the 2014 referendum, if we might. You know, Alex Salmond started that campaign a long way behind. It wasn't that close in the end. It wasn't as close as we thought it was going to be. Yeah. Recently, opinion polls have suggested it's very close, as Peter was saying, on a knife edge for this election and potentially for a referendum. How much has changed and why?
So I think it's like, if we go back to that period, the actual referendum itself was just so important because it enabled the SNP to kind of get those votes for independence away from the Labour Party. So if Labour voters wanted independence, they swung behind the SNP. It made the constitutional question absolutely centre stage, and then it's propelled the SNP to electoral dominance in Scotland since then. And of course, what that has done is it's given Nicola Sturgeon a platform to really pursue the message for independence, and it's also allowed her to demonstrate governing competence, you know, performance and delivery. And so governing as an independent country with an independent Scottish Parliament might not be so risky because voters in Scotland have seen what it could be like, and Nicola Sturgeon has been judged to have done quite well, fairly well, relatively well, in terms of handling the COVID pandemic. That is also in contrast to Scottish voters' opinions of the Westminster government and of the Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who has far lower favourability in Scotland. And so that kind of context sets the scene, and then Brexit as this additional dimension. So the SNP can win votes on performance, on independence, and also amongst those Scottish voters who want to remain part of the EU.
Well, Colin, can I just put all that to you and just talk us through, if you would, through the electoral map and particularly what you're looking at tomorrow and what her chances are really of getting a majority?
Well, you have to remember, Tom, that when the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Senate was set up, the electoral system was deliberately designed to try and make it almost impossible for any one party to get an overall majority. It's never happened in Wales, and the only time it's happened in Scotland was in 2011 when Alex Salmond was First Minister. And so I think you can't trivialise the task that Nicola Sturgeon has got to get this overall majority. And the SNP probably needs 45% of the vote in both the constituency and the regional votes in order to achieve that. Because although, as Peter was saying, they've got some target seats, especially around Edinburgh, that they'll be hoping to win, if they win those constituency seats, that means they may lose some of the regional top-up seats unless they manage to stabilise that vote. And of course, both Conservative and Labour, although fighting amongst themselves as to who's going to be second, have a kind of interest in stopping the SNP, and the more votes they could persuade for people to go to them rather than to the SNP, especially at the regional level or even tactically at constituency level, it could make it even harder for Nicola Sturgeon to achieve that. So if she gets there, I think she will have done really very well.
OK, Colin, we'll come back to you in a moment to talk about the English elections. And counting starts for some of the Scottish Parliament seats at 9 in the morning, with the first results due sometime after midday tomorrow. But the last results, as Peter was saying, won't be known until Saturday evening, possibly even Sunday morning. As for England and Wales, well, people have been voting today for 142 English councils. More than 5,000 seats have been up for grabs. The majority of results are expected on Friday and Saturday, but it could be as late as Monday until we have them all. There have been 13 key mayoral elections, among them Liverpool City Region, Greater Manchester, Tees Valley, London, the West Midlands and the West of England. First results due early tomorrow, lasting through to Sunday. In Hartlepool, the by-election was held for a new MP. That result should be one of the first in early tomorrow morning. Wales, voters were choosing 60 members of the Senate, the Welsh Parliament. Those results are expected by late tomorrow evening. And all that wasn't enough. There have been 39 police commissioner jobs up for election. We won't know those results until Monday.
His last trip to the ballot box ended in resounding victory for Boris Johnson. Life may have changed a lot since 2019, but in post-Brexit, pandemic hit Britain. Have voters changed with it? He very much hopes so, but as Sir Keir Starmer cast his own vote in the capital this morning in what's become safe Labour territory, he knows away from London the same cannot be said. If both men could have voted here instead today, they would have. Hartlepool, a town that last voted Tory the year Boris Johnson was born, could be on the verge of breaking the habit of a lifetime and abandoning Labour in a by-election billed as a barometer for the party's new leadership.
I see it going well for Conservative. I think it's mainly to do with how well the vaccine has gone.
You can actually see the deprivation and the hardship, and for people to, you know, turn blue and vote Conservative, I just find it unbelievable.
But lose here and Labour will start to worry elsewhere. The party will hope for gains in the 5,000 council seats up for grabs in England and is confident of victory in the new mayoral post of West Yorkshire. But in this factory in Wakefield, while workers expect to wake up to a new Labour mayor this weekend, the party still has plenty to win over.
Pull from the other parties would have wanted to be in the position that Boris Johnson's been in. You know, the things they've had to deal with and everything they've had to look for and deal with. So no, I think he's done a good job.
Having had a particularly worrying and difficult time over the last 12 months, we're now back on track, and we've been supported well by, in my view, the national government.
In Wales, where it's a Labour government that's led the pandemic response, the party is hoping for its own COVID boost. The election for all 60 Senedd seats is being fronted by First Minister Mark Drakeford, who, barring an almighty political shock, will still be in the job tomorrow night. And in the race for London City Hall, the only thing Labour has to guard against is complacency. Sadiq Khan on course for a second term and a potential landslide over the Conservatives. But winning the capital and running the country again is the gap Labour must bridge. And tonight, they'll take hanging on to what they've got. Daniel Hewitt, News at 10.
Well, as we said, the results or the votes from the Hartlepool by-election are being counted overnight, and the result is due between 4 and 6 in the morning. So we should know by breakfast time. In the meantime, for a sense of how it might have gone, Libby is there. Libby, I know it's always so difficult, isn't it, on these evenings to get a sense on the ground of what may or may not have happened. But what are you picking up?
Well, Tom, I think it's looking very likely that the Conservatives could take Hartlepool. Now, they've never won this seat before, so that would be a pretty sensational upset in one way. But in another way, it wouldn't be surprising at all, because in the 2019 general election, the Brexit Party won 10,000 votes. And if only half of those votes go to the Conservatives, that would get Jill Mortimer, their candidate, over the line. But I think there's another factor at play. The fact is that Labour's brand here is not what it was. This used to be a new Labour stronghold. After all, Peter Mandelson represented this seat. But the continuing decline of the area, well, that's been laid at Labour's door as much as the Conservatives, even though the Conservatives have been in power nationally since 2010. Keir Starmer has said that he has a mountain to climb to take this seat, to carry on holding Hartlepool. But I think, in fact, when you speak to people on the ground, it is looking like a foregone conclusion now that the Conservatives will take this seat.
OK, Libby, well, thank you very much indeed. Let's go back to Colin now. Colin, we were just talking, we understand why Scotland's important. Hartlepool, obviously, massively important in all kinds of ways. But taking the other elections in the round, how important are they in terms of taking the temperature of national politics?
Well, I think if Hartlepool comes in as a Conservative victory, the party, the Conservatives, will try and represent it as some kind of earthquake, because I think it's more like an aftershock of the 2019 general elections. As Libby said, the Conservatives were not that far away from winning it then, and were probably deprived only by the Brexit party, whereas they won several neighbouring constituencies. But I think if we really want to see how the so-called red wall is going and what the new Labour image is under Keir Starmer, we want to look at some of the places where the elections are taking place in a rather quieter atmosphere, in the same area, but places where Labour did very badly in 2019, in County Durham, where there are full elections, in Sunderland, in Barnsley, in Doncaster, and all those places in the north where either Labour lost seats or came very close to losing seats in 2019. They will want to see that they've drawn a line under what happened then. Hartlepool will be the noise, but I think those other areas may perhaps give a more comforting signal to Keir Starmer and his colleagues. OK, Colin, come back to you. We'll see you tomorrow when we may get some indication of how things are going. Jane, can I bring this particular question to you? Why isn't Labour, we're 11 years into a Tory administration, why isn't Labour doing better?
So we've just had a really extraordinary period in British politics. If we think about the Brexit referendum, what did the Brexit referendum do? It made British politics much more two-dimensional. So instead of just being about economics, it's now also about this important question of Brexit. Now, in 2019, in the general election, what we saw is the Conservatives really were much more successful in building this broad coalition on economics, but also they got the vast majority of Leave voters, so they unified the Leave vote. Labour, on the other hand, its vote is much more splintered. So the Remain vote, Labour is essentially having to compete amongst other parties for those same voters, for the SNP in Scotland, with Plaid in Wales, with the Liberal Democrats and with the Greens. And so it's much more difficult for Labour to do that. And so you see Labour losing its support in its heartlands on this issue of Leave, as well as, I think, some economics and as well as Boris Johnson's popularity in those constituencies. That's building on a sort of longer term kind of decaying of Labour's support gradually. But it's that all-important, really difficult dilemma Labour's now in, caused by that two-dimensional competition and the fracturing of the Remain side of the vote.
OK, Jane, fantastic. Let's pick it up tomorrow. But for now, thank you very much indeed. And I was about today to say to today's other news, but in a happy coincidence for the government on election day, the Bank of England has predicted a bigger than expected bounce back for the economy. The ever cautious bank has significantly upped this year's GDP forecast. The governor said we haven't seen anything like it since the Industrial Revolution, and he should know. He wrote his Cambridge PhD on that very subject. Instead of the 5% the bank was predicting, it now says it'll be closer to 7.25. 1.3 million jobs will likely be saved, and the FTSE saw levels it has not seen since February last year.
Things are looking up in Southampton and across the UK. The buzz is returning to high streets. Hairdressers can't cut fast enough. Shops are welcoming their customers back. Spending was always going to rebound quickly when restrictions eased, but the vitality of the recovery has surprised even the Bank of England.
It is very good news that we're certainly very positive in our view of what's going to happen to the economy this year. We think it is going to substantially recover by the end of the year. That implies a growth rate that is pretty unprecedented. But it means 2 years of lost growth, essentially.
So this is a bounce back, it's not a boom?
It's a bounce back, yeah.
Last year, the economy shrank by almost 10% as economic activity collapsed at its fastest pace in around 300 years. But the bank expects growth this year to surge by more than 7% before slowing again. Our prospects are transformed. A year ago, the bank feared the unemployment rate could peak at 9.5%, leaving 3.1 million people out of work. It now thinks it will peak in the autumn at 5.5%, leaving 1.8 million people unemployed. The Bank of England assumes that the vaccine rollout continues apace and that the government's roadmap out of lockdown goes according to plan, that restrictions lift entirely by the end of June and that household spending and business investment roar back. But the main reason that the prospects for employment look so much brighter than they did 3 months ago is the furlough scheme has been extended until the end of September. The bank estimates almost 3 million people are still furloughed. It now expects the majority of them to return to work. I asked the governor what he thinks would have happened had the furlough scheme not existed.
I mean, the impact of that would have been unbearable. It hardly bears thinking about, frankly. The impact on the people of this country would have been intolerable.
It would have been mass unemployment,
It would have been mass unemployment. It would have been, and things beyond that in terms of the consequences for individuals.
But for some, talk of a recovery feels premature. This play centre has 6 staff on furlough and is being kept alive by government grants. It reopens in 10 days' time, but will lose money for as long as there is social distancing.
If I cannot do parties, we won't survive. If I can make it to August, yes, we get a little bit more trade in the 6 weeks holiday. It's so uncertain. The books, they don't add up.
Parts of the economy remain in deep freeze, but a thaw is underway, and if the bank is right about the recovery, then forget talk of negative interest rates. The market expects bank rate to begin to rise next year. Joel Hills, News at 10.
And speaking of it being election day, a bit of gunboat diplomacy and gung-ho newspaper front pages is never likely to harm the chances of a Conservative Prime Minister. So for a time today, it looked like things might turn nasty off the coast of Jersey. France responded to the arrival of 2 Royal Naval ships in the area by dispatching 2 of its own patrol boats to protect French fishing boats. A flotilla of about 60 arrived off Jersey early this morning to protest about their allocation of post-Brexit fishing licences. They headed home eventually, but that does not mean the dispute is over.
A flotilla of fishing boats appeared just after dawn. A fiery French fleet, intent on making their feelings known. One Jersey-based boat seemingly tried to steer them off course. The damage perhaps more to pride than possessions. The French faced no more resistance and continued in number towards their target. The port of St Helier, and a blockade preventing the Channel Islands supply ship from leaving. The Royal Navy, tasked to this island yesterday, watched on from a distance as the French invasion of this harbour succeeded in trapping the large ship inside. The problem, he says, is that Jersey wants to extend its waters, and he added that means that some French boats have been prevented from fishing. Jersey put up a theatrical show of defiance. But the French were undeterred, focused instead on their post-Brexit frustrations. New rules compel French fishers to prove they have a history of working in Jersey's waters to gain a licence, but some have failed to provide the evidence, leaving them to fish only in EU waters.
This is clearly a marked escalation in the simmering tensions between Jersey and France. The French are furious that they haven't got the same fishing access that they once had, and they're making their point.
France and Jersey are 14 miles apart, and there is sympathy here for the French position.
It's a real shame that it's got to this stage. We are so close to France. There is solidarity between the fishing community of Jersey and France. There has been for years.
Jersey sent a minister to talk to the French. We overheard them say rules are rules, but Jersey is willing to be sensible.
No more blockades?
I don't know. It is up to them. We opened the dialogue.
and we are very, very happy to talk with them, to keep talking with them. Again, we want to recreate a liaison committee so that we can have this dialogue going on. It's up to them to decide whether they're satisfied for today.
Tonight, the French government emphasised the need for resolution while London announced warships would leave soon. The flotilla has already left, hoping there is no catch that will force a quick return. Rupert Evelyn, News at 10, Jersey.
Now to some news of increases here in cases of the Indian variant of coronavirus. There are now 48 different clusters. Most are linked to international travel. In India itself, cases continue to rise, and we understand the strain will be declared a variant of concern here tomorrow. Surge testing will begin in the main cluster areas in northwest England, the Midlands and London. Now, if international travel is indeed behind the outbreak of those clusters, it is no wonder so much thought is going into working out where we might be able to take foreign holidays this summer. This is the moment in the programme where permitted a quiet moment of prayer, because tomorrow we should find out which countries are on the so-called green list. Demand for flights to Portugal is already rising in anticipation. One country almost certain to be on the list is Israel. Its vaccination programme has gone even better than our own.
The ancient port of Jaffa. In Greek mythology, it was on the rocks off here that Perseus used Medusa's head to slay the Kraken and free Andromeda. Today, the state of Israel has been liberated from the clutches of the threat that is coronavirus, and one dividend may be a summer influx of European tourists, including Brits.
It's been a long year. Now that Tel Aviv is vaccinated.
The message is very much that this city and this country are now ready to receive visitors once more.
Tel Aviv-Yafo municipality is incredibly eager for Brits to return to Israel. They're more than welcome. Brits are the 5th most important source of tourism for Tel Aviv, and they have everything here that they could want.
Israel has beaches on the Sea of Galilee and the Dead and Red Seas, but it's the ones on the Med Sea that are the big attraction. Tel Aviv alone has almost 9 miles of sand. These may well be the safest beaches in the Mediterranean this summer. That's because the vast majority of locals have been fully vaccinated, and the tourists who choose to come here and join them will have to have been as well. After more than a year of banning foreigners, the plan is for Israel to begin readmitting them from May the 23rd. Tel Aviv's David Intercontinental Hotel has been locked down since March 2020, but that ends tonight when its doors reopen at long last. After all the gloom, there's optimism in the air here.
I really sense it's like an exodus out of our corona, and if you walk the streets of this fantastic city, it's quite remarkable. It's only a month ago where no one was really in the street, and now it's a party time. It's a party town.
To begin with, the travel corridor will have the odd stumbling block, but its creation at all is progress, a leap forward for those yearning for Mediterranean sun this summer. John Irvine, News at 10, Tel Aviv.
Boy, does that look tempting. Now, the dreams of an all-English European football final slipped away tonight in the Europa League semi-finals. Manchester United, unusually in black and white, did make it through, with Cavani getting their second. That was enough away at Roma, losing 2-3 on the night, but winning 8-5 over 2 legs. But Arsenal's season is over playing at home. They failed to claw back a 2-1 deficit from the first leg against Spain's Villarreal. Tonight's match ended in a disappointing 0-0 draw, but a jubilant Villarreal are through to the final, as you can see. Now, from first thing this morning to sunset a little over an hour ago here, Scots have been voting in their millions for the kind of future they want. There is a tartan tapestry of different issues that will shape the results, especially after the year we've all had. Campaigning have been different this time around, but underlying everything is whether that future lies inside or outside the union.
From dawn this morning, the UK's northernmost nation began deciding if these might become foreign shores. The pristine polling card in Strathaven is Grace's first, as she voted with her school friend Greg. So Grace, what are you going to do with your vote?
I haven't decided yet. I'm going to be thinking about all the polls and all the manifestos that I've looked at in the next 30 seconds before I vote.
So you're literally going to decide when you get in there?
Literally going to decide when I get in there.
And Greg, what about you?
Yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards voting SNP. I think that the future of Scotland is for the people of Scotland to decide.
All right, well, good luck, guys.
Thank you.
As they found their polling place in soaking Strathaven, from sunny Shetland to freezing cold Kincraig, others braved theirs. Even these nuns in Kirkcaldy were in the voting habit. Identity is everything in this election. On the estates of Aberdeen, like anywhere, they are divided over independence.
There's been arguments amongst our families. I want to be part of the UK. Yeah, UK, Great Britain. What our families, our relatives, our grandfathers, our grandmothers fought in the war as the UK. And to me, I think it's such a shame to just separate Scotland from England.
That old debate had some new perspectives today, as Scotland became the first in the UK to grant refugees the vote.
Did it feel like a significant moment?
Really very, very significant. And that was like, you know, like a bit, yeah, like feel like honorable or honored, yeah, to do something, yeah. So I was really walking to the polling place with that power. That's, yeah.
A real privilege.
Yeah, privilege to do it, yeah.
And who did you vote for in the end?
As a refugee, we came here, it was under SNP. And also it was under SNP that we have the right to vote. So you can actually guess. You know what I'm saying? You can actually guess.
The rest of Scotland will keep us guessing until results are declared in the coming days. When the votes are tallied, will the Union still count?
And to round off what may indeed prove to be an historic day, Paul joins me. There's never been a more apt time to be called UK editor, but you feel the UK is creaking a bit.
Absolutely, Tom. I mean, this week marked the centenary of Northern Ireland, 100 years, in other words, of the Union as it's currently constituted. And it's really difficult tonight to predict how many more years of the Union there could be, particularly here in Scotland. All indications are that there will be a majority tomorrow for pro-independence parties, as we've been hearing tonight. We don't know if that'll be the SNP governing alone or perhaps with the help of the Greens. That will in part determine the strength of Nicola Sturgeon's hand in arguing for a second referendum. I think perhaps counterintuitively her hand will also be strengthened by the Tories doing well in England. A good showing there for the Conservatives, I think, would entrench the sense that those two nations are moving in different directions, really. Entrench and empower both party leaders, too, in their positions over a second referendum. Important to note tonight, too, that the constitutional question has reached Wales at a much earlier stage of the conversation, but nevertheless, independence featuring in this election, really for the first time in Wales. So I think the hours ahead will be crucial for the United Kingdom. Scotland in particular has had its say, but I don't think it'll be the last word on the future of the Union.
OK, Paul, conversation to be continued, no doubt. As we've said, the results are going to come in over the coming days. We'll be here. Please do join us. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Good night.